to the official podcast at contentchampion.com. Join our heroic quest to discover truly epic content marketing. Introducing your host, the content champion himself, Loz James.
Hi guys, welcome to show 21 of the Content Champion podcast. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate you being here. This time round, I'm chatting with expert marketer Brian Rice of business2Community.com. Brian and his business partner have pioneered a unique model of permission-based RSS syndication that has rapidly grown the business-to-community audience to over 1 million readers a month. And this is for a site that Brian only works on in his spare time. With such impressive stats and an intriguing online business model, I couldn't wait to get the lowdown on exactly what Brian is doing to make this model work. Let's dive in. Thanks very much for coming on today, Brian.
Well, thank you for having me.
We love to hear our guest stories, so could you tell us a bit about how you got started online, please?
Sure. So I've always had an interest in the online space, specifically digital marketing. My background's always been in marketing, and I spent multiple years at an online agency working with, big clients on their paid search and SEO, strategies. So I always was intrigued by that. And then in, I guess it was 2010, when I joined SAP, there was a big push within the organization for, developing thought leadership, through the use of social media and creating blogs. So there were a lot of colleagues at that time that were, building, personal blogs to, share their stories and knowledge. And that kind of intrigued me as something that, I would be interested in doing. So literally about 4 years ago to the day here, I launched B2C marketing insider.com, which was my personal blog, and eventually became what's known as business2community.com. So everything that the community has begun started with me as the sole blogger, and then branched out from there.
Now, your model at Business to Community intrigues me. You have an open community of members, and you permission publish high-profile experts' work via RSS across various categories like social, business, tech, and lifestyle. Have I got that right? And how does it exactly work?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the blog started with all original content, and it stayed that way for about the first year and a half or so, where I was the sole blogger. And during that time, I started participating in some communities that would syndicate, your blog in hopes of getting extra exposure for that. And I was intrigued by that model. But at the time, there was a lot of things that were left to be desired. So in those communities that I was participating, it wasn't uncommon for my content to look like it was written by them or by somebody else, because they were having some issues with the syndication process. So I kind of took it upon myself to find a way to fix that model and build a better experience, from there. So my partner, Dan Creel, actually had figured out the way from a coding perspective to solve that process. So we started taking on guest contributors that were sharing, original content first, and then we evolved into syndicating content through RSS feed with permission. So all of the stuff that we are publishing today, I would say about half of it is original to the site. 30% of it then is coming through on the syndicated content, and the other 20% of the contributors are doing some mixture of both. They're either, repurposing their content specifically for our audience, or writing original stuff on top of the content that they're syndicating through.
So the experts that syndicate to you, how does it work in terms of them signing up, and what do they have to do? Say you're a big blog like Content Marketing Institute, and you syndicate to you, which I know they do. Well, what did they need to do to sign up to be an author on the blog?
Yeah, so we have a process in place. So if you're interested in contributing, you just email us at contribute@business2community.com. And what we do is we'll review the content first to make sure that it is fit for our audience and quality and frequency of posting. So, if you're posting once every 4 months, probably not a good fit for syndication. From there, we ask for written permission to actually syndicate the blog and then all of the author's information so that we can properly tie back to the individual that authored the post and give them the ability to build a author profile. So, we have blogs that are single-authored versus multi-authored, and it's really important for us to have the full author attribution coming through.
Okay, now obviously Google doesn't know that you've got written permission, and I guess you must get asked this all the time. I know it's only 50% of the content is through RSS feeds, but does that cause any problems with the search engines, or do they sort of lap up your fresh, regular content?
So there's no issues at all for us or those that are syndicating. So we make it very clear in the syndication process to not only state via text that the article was republished versus permission, but we link back to the original source and giving Google that opportunity to find the source where it was originally published. So we're by no means trying to trick the engine into thinking that we were the originator of this content, which happens a lot of times with sites that are just scraping content. I like to keep the written record of permission because at any time, somebody can come and say that they would like to stop syndication. So I just want to make sure that, we're dealing with the correct people on the sides of the business, because I believe that they're the owners of the content. So a lot of times we get the question about the duplicate content, and in fact, syndication of content is not a form of duplicate, right? Matt Cutts at Google has even created videos around the fact that syndicating your content can actually be beneficial for your SEO because you're building, strong links and getting in front of an audience that you might not be able to by yourself, right? So if you look at a lot of the big blogs like Mashable, Huffington Post, Business Insider, a lot of their content is syndicated from other sources as well. And even sites like Yahoo, a lot of their content is from syndicated sources. So it's really the duplicate content issue is coming into play when it's on your domain and you're repurposing the same thing over and over again. Or I see frequently people, go away on vacation and they run their best of content. If you're just publishing the same article that you published, 6 months ago, that's definitely duplicate content. So we've seen no issues across the board on our site or from those that are contributing.
That said, though, obviously only half the content is syndicated. For the purposes of original content variation, you'd never consider or advise going on to 100% RSS syndication feed model. Any listeners thinking, I could just go and set up a site and pull in 100% of the content in this way, that wouldn't work because you're not providing anything original to go with that.
It depends. There are certainly sites that do that. I can't speak for their direct success, but just looking at what they're getting in terms of their Alexa rankings, they're doing fairly well. I think that that was never my intention to just be a curator of somebody else's content. Something like Alltop, they curate a lot of content for people's RSS feeds, right? The majority of that stuff is syndicated stuff. So I think it depends on what your aspirations are, right? So because the site started as personal blog, I wanted it to be original, right? And I think there's a mixture of people based on their objectives, right? So let's say if you wanted to establish yourself as a thought leader on some topic, you could go and build the blog, right, and take the time and resources into that. Or you could come to a site like ours and become a contributor and tap into a known audience, right? So we have people that want the blog, they just don't want the effort of having to maintain the site. And then that's a good fit for us to get original content, right? And on the flip side, there are people who want to have a home base for their original content, but they need more exposure, so they can come to us and we can provide that for them.
And what sort of stats in terms of visitors, authors signing up to the site, are they going to get a lot more exposure than if they put it on their starter blog, as it were?
Today, we get a little over 1 million monthly visitors. Roughly 80% of those are unique, and we grow about 10 to 15% month over month in terms of traffic. So we continue to see great growth. I think the other benefit that we have is that our content gets syndicated into Google, Bing, and Yahoo News, which provides tremendous exposure beyond our site. So one of my favorite examples is we had a contributor who their post was on branding and logo design. They were talking about Yahoo's new logo, and it found its way onto the homepage of Yahoo, where it got a little over 2 million views. They never would have gotten 2 million views of that article on their own site. So that type of exposure tends to be very valuable to our contributors.
Those are fantastic stats. I obviously don't want to give away any of your secrets, but you talked about the technological standpoint. Your partner has developed your own RSS technology to sort of seamlessly integrate author feeds. Is this something anyone listening can do if they want to, say, syndicate safely some news on their site if they're providing original articles as well? Or is this really something you need bespoke technology for? Is there anything else we could use to do it? Or do you recommend you really have to make the investment in getting the technology right?
So the great thing is, so when Dan was working on our RSS piece, so he tapped into a WordPress plugin that already existed and found the break in the code and then provided that update to the person that created it. So that plugin is fixed and anybody can use it. So if you did a search on RSS WordPress plugins, you're going to find it. I think the bread and butter part of it is the process for it. So we actually have an individual that touches every single piece of content that comes through. So we do not automate the syndication that's happening, right? So there's a lot of things that have to be taken in consideration when those posts come through. So just the look and feel of it is one piece, right? The RSS brings in a lot of junk code that you have to clean up for the posts in some cases. And then more importantly, is the content a fit for the audience and match the tone that you're trying to present? So we review that things to make sure that the posts aren't, overly promotional or opinion-based versus fact-led, those type of things. So that's probably the biggest hurdle is having the quality check in place and being able to support that part of the process.
And also, you've gone from a personal blog to getting some really big names, I was looking through them, agreeing to syndicate their content in writing. Most people running a blog, if I approach, say, Joe Palizzi, for example, to use the example again, and said, can I syndicate your stuff on my site? Yeah, he might say yes, but probably wouldn't. So how did you do that? How did you go from being an individual blogger to getting these big names to agree to be on your site?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I focused in the beginning, before I even launched the blog, on creating the content side of it. So I had written 50 posts ahead of time so that every day I could publish one piece of content. So my hope was to quickly establish myself in the eyes of the search engines that I was going to be producing high quality content on a regular basis while building my initial audience. So by having stuff kind of in the well allowed me to, keep writing every day to backfill the posts that I was publishing. So I was fortunate that within, I think, 3 months of blogging, the site skyrocketed up and was one of Ad Age's top 150 marketing blogs. And once it got that recognition, I started getting requests from people saying, oh, I'd love to contribute on your blog, because they wanted the additional exposure that meant. So I started doing some vetting to make sure that I agreed with their content and such, and gave a test with that. So it was really over time just building relationships with other bloggers, and it was never the big names, right? I'm a nobody. I don't have a book. I don't go on the speaking tour. 99% of the people don't even know that the blog started as my personal blog. But it was about building relationships and high quality content. So I started initially just reaching out to people that I was reading their stuff and really admired, and asking them if they would like to contribute. And so for about a year, I did that to build up that group of contributors, and found that most of them, 75%, were very agreeable to that. And they got to the point now that every day we get somewhere between 25 and 50 requests to contribute to the site. So we're no longer doing the outreach, but there was a lot of investment into the relationship side with other bloggers. Because I believe that everybody's looking to do the same thing, right? Build quality and gain an audience for their stuff.
How much do you think the algorithmic changes recently to Google, particularly in terms of freshness and consistency, how much do you think that's helped your business model?
I think it has a big part, and I think that Google has really tried to take a stab at providing better results in their search, queries. So I think between the Penguin and Panda update, almost all of the big sites took some type of flash, right, in terms of the traffic that they were getting from search, and we saw a little bit of a dip too, but now all of those things are really rebounding. But our social audience and traffic was growing at the same time. So the mixture of stuff that we're getting from social is quickly becoming, as important from search, right? If you look at sites like BuzzFeed, vast majority of their traffic is coming from sites like Facebook and Twitter versus search. So there's more of a need to have not only fresh content, but stuff that is shareable.
Now, we've mentioned Google Alerts. I found you through Google Alerts because I share stuff on social media about content marketing, and your site kept popping up in my Google Alerts. And I thought, these guys, Google absolutely loves them. So we talked about the search engine side of things, and we know the quality is great because it's all from experts. So is that the value you're giving to readers? They can get regularly updated, extremely high value, high quality posts from industry insiders, as it were.
Yeah, I think so, right? In terms of the value proposition that we're looking to give is not only providing that platform for bloggers to share their content, but also curating the best of. So I think that's what people are keep coming back for, is that there's a trust that the content on our site is going to be well thought out.
You're listening to the Content Champion Podcast, showcasing the best content marketing strategies across the web.
We're back with Brian Rice. Let's move on. Again, I don't want to take any of your secrets on this podcast. You do monetize the site, though, with adverts and webinars, and they're the sort of main income drivers, are they, in terms of the model you're using? And again, we don't have to discuss exact figures, but I know the site is successful with that amount of visitors every month.
Yeah, I think that, it's going to vary case by case, right, in terms of what your objectives are. So in the beginning, there was very little in terms of, I want to monetize this site, right? It was more about just a place to share knowledge and trying to build an audience, around the content. And then over time, what we've done is try to make sure that the offers, whether they be webcasts that we're doing or white papers that we're promoting, are really relevant to our audience. So in terms of the click-throughs that we get on the banner ad placements, that we do run, they tend to be a large multiple of what industry averages would be. So it's not uncommon for our stuff to get a 0.2 or a 0.4 click-through rate on those ads, where you may expect to get a 0.05% if you are run a site somewhere else. So if we match the offers to the content and the audience, things do extremely well. So I can tell you on the things where we're doing our events and our white papers, the click-throughs on those things tend to be in the 5% potentially on the upper end of it. And then conversion rate, once people get to those registration pages, in the 30 to 40% range. So we've really tried to focus on having that match be there and not just run stuff for the sake of running it.
And you split testing everything, all your ad placements and your webinar sign-up pages and all that?
Yeah, we always test, field placements, the different types of tactics, et cetera, right? What I really liked about the site is this isn't my full-time job by any means, so it's very much a testing ground for things. So I'm not afraid to experiment with the site.
I think that's great. You're getting 1 million visitors a month or 1 million page views a month.
Million visitors, closer to, like 1.6 million page views in there.
So you're getting that amount of traffic and it's not even a full-time blog. It's quite amazing,
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah, I used to tell people this was like my keep me off the streets late at night. So after I put in my day's work from like 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the morning, I was responding to every email that came through, writing blog posts, etc., to get this going. And it wasn't until last year that we had a full-time resource. So Renee, our editor, has been a fantastic addition to the team and really keeps things running during the day.
Can I just back up a little bit and go back to those 50 posts you wrote when you started to blog off? Could you tell me a bit more about the frequency you published those in, how long they were, what sort of subjects they cover? Because I think our listeners will find that very interesting, the ones that have just started a blog and are looking to grow it quite quickly.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is the first post I ever wrote was horrible, right, in terms of the metrics of it. So, I think in that first month, it was read 3 times. So one was me previewing it, and then, my family was one of them, and some random person was the other one. But what happened over time was I was very looked inward, right, and realized that there wasn't a lot of personality that was shared in it. It felt very academic. But I think the real lesson from this was, because I didn't give up and be discouraged with the results of that first one, now that same post is getting, 20 or 30 reads every day, right? So if you take that over the course of 4 years, that adds up, right? So there's something to be said with building quality content over time is going to help with establishing and growing your audience. So in terms of the topics, what I set out to do was talk about traditional marketing, because that's what my background was, and then the digital and social marketing, because that's where my career is today. So a lot of it was thoughts on campaigns that I saw other companies running, or my thoughts on how you could use these different platforms and tactics, and that was the core of those first 50 or so posts. And then there was some fun stuff in there about oddball things in the news or whatever that I gave commentary on. Over time, so now if you looked at the site, I think we have like 50 different categories. And so as you mentioned, it covers everything from social to tech to mobile, etc. The audience and the contributors really had a huge impact in that. So I've always taken to heart the feedback that has been given to the site, either good or bad, as a means of improving it. So almost all of the additional categories that are on the site beyond the marketing and social media ones that it began with were suggestions from either readers that were like, oh, we wish that we could, hear your thoughts on these topics, or somebody came and said, hey, we know a lot about mobile marketing or app development or whatever. We'd love to contribute. So those people were very crucial in building out those categories there. So it was more about the collaboration. So I think the biggest thing was just kind of letting go, right? And going from, hey, this is my blog, to this is really a community approach. So if somebody came today and said, oh, we want to be blogging about X, then, I'm working with them to figure out, well, how do we start that category? What type of content would attract an audience for that? And how could we get more contributors to help support that? So it's very much been trial and error, from there. And it's been a fun journey.
And just one more question about those first 50 posts, if I may. How long were they? About sort of 1,000 to 2,000 words? And did you publish sort of one every day or twice a week? Or what did you do just to get the ball rolling?
So most of them, I think the sweet spot kind of falls in that 300 to 500 words in length. I was doing a Monday through Friday, one post every morning. And then it got to the point where there was enough where I was trying to do, 2 posts a day. And then it got to, all right, now I'm going to add posts on the weekend, type thing. So the thing that I always recommend to new bloggers, or even those that are doing today, is just establish some type of routine, right? So if you only have enough time to blog once a week, make sure you publish that post on the same day and time so that your readers become accustomed to saying, oh, every Monday at 9 o'clock in the morning, if I go to X site, I know that there's going to be fresh content there, right? And that kind of plays out as well on the search engine side of things, right? So if you start creating this pattern, it's going to be easier for the engines to find you as well as your audience. So just find that groove that works for you.
Okay, so it's like write like a human and then publish like a search engine.
In terms of the repetitive nature of it, right, from a time point of view, right? It's and that's more so on the evergreen stuff, right? So if you were going to talk about it being Twitter's 8th anniversary today, posting that on Sunday is going to have less of an impact, right? Because it's old news. But if you're talking about the top tips for social selling, then make sure you're publishing that on a day that's going to have the most impact and have that kind of cadence for when you're publishing.
And what sort of spread do you have between news and evergreen content?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't say that I've ever done an analysis on that part today. We certainly have more contributors that are doing the evergreen stuff than they are the news, but we tend to, I think we have something like 15,000 contributors. So the likelihood if, Facebook makes a change to their algorithm that half a dozen of those people are going to write something about that with a different point of view is highly likely. But we tend to skew more on the evergreen. So that's an area that I'm trying to work on, is how to get more of the news type stuff mixed in there.
I wonder if the news articles do get more traffic despite being less of them. It's interesting just because the model is pretty unique, what you're doing, the way you're using the technology, and I'm wondering if news trumps evergreen despite it being the smaller amount of posts. But
it depends, right? I think quality always trumps both of that, right? So there are times in which you can try to chase traffic with the trends, but that's very challenging to do to begin with, and even harder to do the right way without it feeling like you're just chasing after the headlines, right? So the volume of the players in there are even greater. So we could have high authority as a marketing-related content, right? But if I write something newsworthy about the Malaysia air flight, right, why would I outrank CNN or USA Today or, insert whatever, right, there? I never would. So you have to come in with a unique perspective on those things versus the evergreen stuff. Over time, it's going to have more content. So I've written posts that had that kind of flash in the pan, right? So like in a day, wow, there's 20,000 or so viewers in an hour, right? And then it dies off and it never comes in again, versus there are posts that I've written that were evergreen that immediately got a couple thousand views, but then every day it's still getting dozens or hundreds of views, and then all of a sudden, somebody will share it and then get another life again, right? So those are the posts that I think you should be striving for, because that's going to add value to you in the long run. It's very hard to break into to be one of those news players.
Okay, let's have a look at the look and feel of the site. How important is it that the posts are well set out typographically and the images are used properly and it's all clean and crisp and easy to read? That must affect your conversions and the readability of the pages. Yeah,
it does. So and it is something we're always looking at, and we actually have plans for another redesign that hopefully will take place this year. But when the blog started, I just used a free theme with it, and it was suitable. But social sharing and all of those things were kind of hampered by the layout and design of that theme. So then we went to a paid premium one. And saw some increase in terms of page views per visit and the social sharing. But when we actually went to something that was fully coded ourselves, that's when things really took off. So if you look at how content is on the homepage today, all new articles will appear on the homepage and then are pushed down as new articles are published. But then as the popularity of those articles grows from a page view and a social sharing perspective, they'll rise back up and get featured. So those posts will see a huge lift if they're one of the top 5 within their category. So we refresh that top 5. If it's a news content, it's on a 24-hour cycle, and if it's in more of the evergreen categories, on a every 3-day, and that's had tremendous impact on it. So things that we're looking at now is, can we understand better the trends that are going on in terms of the social sharing outside of our site, so that when people come into the site, the personalization of the content that they're seeing is different from user to user. We're hoping to weave in some of that with the new design for the site.
Looking ahead to how you think the model will evolve over the next year or so, this is going to obviously continue to be viable because you've explained why the search engines love it, but what sort of plans do you have? How do you see the whole thing evolving over the next year or two?
The big thing for us has always been, how do we stay ahead of other sites in terms of providing the value to our contributors in a way that causes them to want to participate more on our community versus elsewhere, right? That we're not the only one that does this. We're not necessarily the only one that does it well. So I'm always thinking of those, things. So it's more about all right, everybody wants exposure, and that's great, but we have now mechanisms for them to be doing lead generation for their organizations by including call to actions and stuff like that in their posts that some of our other peers in the space don't allow. So we're always looking for that added benefit. And then from an audience perspective, it's how do we stay ahead of the trends and include new categories that are going to pull in that audience that we aren't reaching today.
That's absolutely dynamite. I was speaking to John Morrow about how he said when you start a blog, you should try and put 80% of your content somewhere else where they get a load of traffic, so you can obviously boost your own blog. But you're saying further than that, you could actually come to your system there, write very high quality content, get it syndicated, and then have calls to action for lead generation, list building, everything else, and instantly tap into all the millions of people that come to your site. That's very compelling, actually, for small business owners who maybe have a blog that doesn't get a lot of traffic and they want to make the most to get the most value out of what you're doing.
Yes, I think that's one of the differentiators that we've had. So of people that share their content to multiple places, the fact that we allow them to be included in there, they're not a in-your-face feeling like you're being marketed to, but rather relevant, value-added type thing. So the folks that do this extremely well are the folks that are HubSpot, partners, where they're talking about content marketing and social media and inbound marketing, et cetera. These are rather popular evergreen topics, and then they'll typically include something like, a white paper for playbook on how to actually execute some of the things that they've been talking about. So the post provides a lot of value, and then the white paper is doing this is how this actually gets this done. So we have numerous folks that they're generating dozens and dozens of leads on a weekly, monthly basis, from us. So I look at some of the things. So if I was thinking trends outside of this, right? So lots of brands talk about native advertising, so they're paying to play on communities like Forbes and Mashable and Business Insider to get their content in front of those audiences. But then what, right? So great, you got 10,000 page views of your article on these sites, but that doesn't mean that these people ever engaged with your brand beyond that. So what we're looking for is how can we show the real business results of you contributing in our community? So we have that as the free part, right? Of you contribute and you have your call to action in there. And then we do have premium packages where we have people that are hosting their white papers or doing events with us as a means of getting even more demand gen as their needs are there.
And just a quick technical aside, something that's occurred to me, In your RSS feed articles, are all the links that point back to the sites? Everything's no follow, I take it, across the board?
No, we're not doing that. What we do look at, though, is to make sure that the links are relevant to the audience. So when we're looking to set people up, right, if a site is geared towards just building links, either internal or external for their site, those are people that get rejected out the gate. But if you're linking out to another, valuable resource, there's no concern on our end for that.
Okay. You did mention some trends then as well, looking forward in the content marketing space over the next 12 months. How's it all sort of looking? If you've got your crystal ball, what's going to happen in the space? What's going to be exciting? What do you see in that sphere going forward?
I think that you're going to start to see people looking more at what the business end of the results are versus the awareness part. So there's going to be greater demand for that, right? You can only have so much appetite of doing this for awareness. The other thing that I'm curious to see how it plays out is a lot of sites are doing more of the snack bite pieces of content. So, they're heavier on image-based, less text, with the list type stuff that BuzzFeed does extremely well. So lots of sites are doing things similar to that. So I'm curious if there's going to be too much saturation of that. And then obviously mobile is going to be a bigger play for how your content gets consumed. So we typically didn't see very much in the past in terms of, mobile visitors to the site, but that's probably getting closer now to like 30 or 40% of our traffic. It's kind of interesting to see the trend. So since our content is more business related, during your typical 9 to 5, 80% of that content today is being consumed on a desktop still. But then once like 5 o'clock comes around, the tablet and mobile skyrockets. So my expectation is that over time, that 9 to 5 stuff is going to transition more to the mobile and tablet as well. So those are things that we're looking at in terms of our site of, how does it become more responsive? How do we make sure that the content is displayed better on those devices?
Well, Brian, you've got a fascinating business model. I must admit, I'm really impressed by all the stats you're pulling, and the site's got some fantastic content on it. I'm on it all the time because I'm going through my Google alerts and reading all the stories that come through. So can you please remind us where we can find you and, some of the value we can get from your site?
Yeah, sure. So it's business2community.com. Anybody is more than welcome if they want to, collaborate on any ideas to give me, send me an email and, happy to discuss. So it's just Brian at business2community.com. I welcome the contributors to it. Our hope would be that we can show some value to you guys and build a relationship from there.
Wait for it, listeners. Here comes the PS question.
This is what I call the PS question. Could you please share one advanced content marketing strategy with my listeners, something they can use right after this podcast?
Yes, this is what we've recently started doing, and has had tremendous effect, but is not necessarily easy to do, but is worth the effort. So what we've done is mapped all of the content that is being created on the site in terms of the topic and the themes to the various offers that we have so that they are being dynamically displayed alongside the right piece of content. So I believe that that's the high correlation to the reason why the click-through rates and conversion rates are so high. So a lot of what people are doing today and calling it as content marketing is just building blogs to attract an audience, and then they don't do anything with those people, right? Or they're displaying an offer that isn't relevant to all of the content that they have created. So very important to match the type of content. So whether it's top of the funnel or, bottom of the funnel to the appropriate offer that matches that part in the buyer's journey. So either if you're doing it manually or automating it, you're going to see tremendous lift in performance.
Well, Brian, that's a fantastic strategy. And as I say, a really fascinating interview. I'd like to thank you for your time today and wish you all the best with Business to Community in the future.
Thank you for the time. I really appreciate it.
So there we have it, folks. That was session 21 of the Content Champion podcast. Thanks again to Brian Rice of Business to Community for an excellent interview. You can find this podcast on the Content Champion website. Stitcher Radio, the BlackBerry Network, and of course on iTunes. And I'd love your reviews if you like what I'm doing. But until next time...
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's the Content Champion.